I had never been afraid of the water. Growing up on the eastern shore, the sea was as much a part of me as my own heartbeat. The scent of salt and the rhythmic crash of waves had been my lullaby since childhood. I spent my summers working as a lifeguard, my autumns watching the tides shift, my winters listening to the groaning ice floes forming along the docks. But that changed the night I went diving with Carter. Carter and I had been friends since high school. He was the adventurous one, the kind of guy who never thought twice before jumping into something headfirst. When he invited me to a late-night dive near an old, abandoned fishing village, I hesitated. It wasn't the water that scared me. It was the way he spoke about it. "Man, there's something weird down there," he'd said, eyes gleaming in the dim light of the dockside bar. "Old wreck, real deep. Nobody talks about it, like they're trying to forget it exists." I scoffed, taking another sip of my beer. "Then how do you know about it?" He grinned. "I heard some of the old-timers talking about it last week. Said it's cursed or some crap like that." Carter loved ghost stories. I wasn't convinced. Still, I agreed to go. We set out just past midnight, motoring our way out into the inky black expanse beyond the docks. The moon was full, casting an eerie silver glow over the water. It was quiet, too quiet. Even the gulls, usually restless at night, were nowhere to be found. We geared up in silence. The water was colder than expected, an unnatural chill creeping through my wet suit as we descended. My flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating schools of darting fish, the occasional flicker of a distant eel. And then, we saw it. It wasn't a wreck, not in the traditional sense. The structure was old, impossibly old, covered in thick, swaying seaweed. Pillars rose from the ocean floor like skeletal remains, barnacle-encrusted and broken in places. I swam closer, my fingers brushing against the rough stone. This wasn't a shipwreck. It was a building. Carter was already ahead, weaving through the ruined columns, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly. My gut twisted as I followed, a suffocating pressure growing in my chest. Something about this place felt wrong. And then Carter disappeared. 1 second, he was there. The next, his light flickered out, swallowed by the abyss. I called his name, my voice muffled and distorted by my regulator. Nothing. My pulse pounded in my ears as I kicked forward, searching, scanning the ruins. The water had darkened, thickened somehow, like I was swimming through ink. Then, I saw it. A face. Not Carter's. Something else. It peered at me from the shadows, its eyes vast and empty, its mouth a gaping black void. Long fingers curled around the edges of a doorway, webbed and clawed, moving with an unsettling grace. I couldn't breathe. I turned, frantically kicking toward the surface, my lungs screaming for air. I felt it move beneath me, a flicker of motion just outside my vision. I broke the surface, gasping, my hands flailing for the side of the boat. Carter was already there, pulling himself up, his face pale, his body shaking. We didn't speak as we tore off our gear, our hands clumsy and numb. We never spoke about it. We never went diving again. And sometimes, when I stand by the shore at night, I feel it watching, waiting. Story 2. The wind howled through the trees as I pulled onto the long, unpaved driveway leading to my new home. It was one of those old colonial-style houses, isolated deep in the woods, exactly what I had been looking for. After years of city noise, I needed the silence. The real estate agent had been hesitant when I inquired about the place, warning me that it had been on the market for years. I assumed it was the location, too remote for most people's liking, but I didn't care. This house was my fresh start. By the time I finished unloading my boxes, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the surrounding forest. The house creaked with age, the wind whistling through the gaps in the wooden siding. I wasn't scared. Not yet. It started the first night. I woke to the sound of knocking. Not a soft tap, but deliberate, rhythmic banging. 3 slow, heavy thuds against the front door. I sat up, my breath catching in my throat. I listened, hoping I had imagined it. Then it came again. 3 knocks. I grabbed the baseball bat I had left by the nightstand and crept to the window, peering out into the darkness. The porch light flickered weakly, barely illuminating the front steps. No one was there. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to take slow breaths. Probably just the wind knocking a branch against the door. Still, I checked the lock twice before going back to bed. The next morning, I found something strange. The welcome mat I had placed by the door was gone. In its place was a single muddy footprint, too large to be mine and barefoot. I tried to shake it off. Maybe an animal dragged the mat away, and the footprint was a trick of the dirt. But that night, it happened again. 3 knocks. I sat up, heart pounding. This time, I didn't hesitate. I yanked the curtain aside and stared at the front porch. For a second, I thought I saw movement, a shifting shadow just beyond the reach of the light. Then, nothing. I didn't sleep after that. The following day, I searched the property. The woods stretched out for miles, dense and eerily quiet. I checked the ground near the porch, expecting to see more footprints. Instead, I found something worse. Carved into the wooden railing was a single word. Mine. My stomach twisted. Someone had been here. Someone had been close enough to touch my house, to mark it. I should have left right then, but I didn't. That night, I sat in the living room with every light on, my bat within reach. The knocking didn't come. Hours passed, and I let myself relax. Then, from the hallway, I heard the creak of a floorboard. I wasn't alone. The realization was instant and suffocating. I gripped the bat, slowly turning my head toward the darkened hallway. The air was thick, heavy, as if something was watching from just beyond the light. And then, a whisper. So close, it could have been right next to my ear. "You shouldn't be here." My blood turned to ice. I lunged for the front door, yanking it open and stumbling onto the porch. The trees loomed, swaying in the wind, but I didn't stop to look. I ran. I don't know how long I was out there before I dared to turn back. The house stood in eerie silence, its dark windows like empty eyes. The front door was open, and in the doorway stood a figure. It was wrong, too tall, too thin, its limbs slightly too long. And as I watched, frozen in terror, it slowly raised its hand and knocked 3 times. I never went back. Story 3. I used to love road trips. There was something freeing about the open road, the hum of the engine, the endless stretch of asphalt ahead. No distractions, no responsibilities. Just me, my car, and whatever playlist I had queued up for the ride. That changed last summer. I was on my way to visit my brother in a small town about 6 hours away. I took the back roads, the kind that barely showed up on GPS, weaving through empty fields and dense patches of forest. It was the middle of the night, just the way I liked it. No traffic, no noise, just the occasional glow of a distant farmhouse. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I saw the hitchhiker. I spotted him up ahead, standing on the shoulder of the road, his figure illuminated in my high beams. He was dressed in a dark hoodie, his hands stuffed into his pockets. His face was obscured by the hood, his posture oddly still. I wasn't in the habit of picking up strangers, but something about the way he stood there, alone in the middle of nowhere, sent a chill down my spine. I didn't slow down. As I passed him, something strange happened. He turned his head, just slightly, but enough for me to catch a glimpse of his face in the rearview mirror. Only it wasn't a face. It was blank. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just smooth, pale skin where features should have been. My stomach dropped. I blinked, my pulse hammering in my ears. When I looked again, he was gone. I nearly slammed on the brakes, but instinct told me not to. Instead, I kept driving, my hands tightening on the wheel. I forced myself to breathe, to focus on the road ahead. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But then, the knocking started. A slow, deliberate tap-tap-tap against the passenger side window. I whipped my head around, nearly losing control of the car. There, outside the window, matching my speed, keeping perfect pace with me, was the hitchhiker. His hood was still up, his face, or lack thereof, tilted slightly toward me. But he wasn't running. He was just there, hovering. I slammed my foot on the gas, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. The car roared forward, the speedometer climbing. I didn't look back. I couldn't. After what felt like an eternity, I reached a gas station at the edge of a small town. I pulled in, my tires screeching, and flung myself out of the car, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The lot was empty. The clerk inside gave me a wary glance as I staggered to the counter. "You all right?" he asked. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just long drive." I bought a bottle of water, my hands still shaking as I fumbled with my wallet. Then, just as I was about to leave, the clerk said something that made my blood run cold. "You didn't come down 46, did you?" I froze. "Yeah," I said slowly. "Why?" The clerk's face darkened. He leaned in slightly, his voice lowering. "Few years back, a guy got hit hitchhiking on that road, died instantly. Ever since then, people say they see him." I stared at him, my mouth dry. "They say he tries to get picked up," the clerk continued. "And if you don't stop..." His eyes flicked to the window. "He follows you." I didn't sleep that night. I don't take back roads anymore. Story 4. I don't work night shifts anymore. I used to love them. Less traffic, fewer distractions, just me and the hum of the city in the dark. I was a delivery driver, not for food, but for medical supplies. Hospitals, clinics, sometimes even private residences. The pay was decent, and the quiet roads made the job almost peaceful. Until one night changed everything. It was around 3 a.m. when I got the call for a last-minute run. A private residence on the outskirts of town needed a delivery, urgent, but routine. I didn't think twice about accepting. The address was in a secluded area, miles away from the nearest major road. As I pulled onto the long, winding driveway, I noticed how isolated the house was. No streetlights, no neighbors, just a single, towering structure surrounded by thick, whispering trees. The house itself was strange, tall and narrow, like an old Victorian mansion, but lacking any charm. The windows were dark, the exterior weathered. It looked abandoned, yet someone had placed an order. I parked and grabbed the package, a small box, lighter than I expected. The label had no name, just an address. Then I saw it. The front door was open, just a crack. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to leave. But I had a job to do. Maybe they were expecting me. Maybe they had left the door open on purpose. I stepped onto the porch, the wood creaking beneath my feet. "Hello?" I called. No answer. The silence felt heavy, pressing in around me. I should have left the package on the step and walked away, but something compelled me to push the door open just a little more. Inside, the air was thick, stale. The faint scent of something rotten lingered. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a grand staircase covered in a thick layer of dust. That was the first red flag. Who orders a delivery if they don't even live in the house? I placed the package just inside the door, ready to leave. Then, from upstairs, a sound. Not footsteps, not a voice. A soft, shuffling movement, like something being dragged across the floor. I froze. My brain scrambled for an explanation. A pet? A sick person needing medical supplies? But deep down, I knew better. I stepped back, heart hammering. The door swung shut behind me with a soft click. And then, the whispering started. It came from the top of the stairs, a low, murmuring voice I couldn't understand. The words were wet, slurred, like someone trying to speak through water. I turned, grabbing the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. The whispering grew louder. Then, the creak of a floorboard. Something was coming down the stairs. I slammed my shoulder against the door, panic rising. My flashlight flickered, and for a brief, horrifying moment, I saw it. A shape at the top of the stairs. Tall, thin, too many joints. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its body moving in a slow, jerking motion as it descended. The whispering turned into a gurgling laugh. I don't remember how I got out. 1 second, I was trapped. The next, I was in my car, speeding down the driveway, gravel spraying behind me. I didn't stop until I was miles away. The next day, I checked my delivery records. The address didn't exist. I quit my job that week. Story 5. I should have never taken the shortcut. It was a simple decision, one that seemed harmless at the time. I was on my way home from a friend's wedding, a 3-hour drive along winding rural roads. Somewhere around midnight, I saw the turnoff. A narrow road cutting through the woods, unmarked on my GPS. It was supposed to save me 20 minutes. It nearly cost me my life. The moment I turned onto the road, something felt off. The trees loomed too close, their branches reaching over the asphalt like skeletal fingers. My headlights barely cut through the dense fog that clung to the ground, swirling unnaturally as I drove. Then, my radio cut out. I didn't think much of it at first, just static, a lost signal. But when I tried to switch stations, the screen went dark. A second later, my headlights flickered. My stomach twisted. I checked my phone. No service. The road stretched on, endlessly looping through the trees. The shortcut was supposed to be a straight shot, but I had been driving for almost 30 minutes. Something was wrong. Then I saw the figure. A man standing on the side of the road, just barely visible through the fog. He wasn't hitchhiking, wasn't moving, just standing there, facing the trees. I barely had time to react before I passed him. A shiver ran down my spine. He hadn't turned to look at me. He hadn't acknowledged my car at all. Just as I started to convince myself it was nothing, I saw him again. Same posture, same clothes, standing further down the road. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering against my ribs. That was impossible. I hadn't turned. I hadn't passed any intersections. But somehow, I had driven in a circle. I checked my rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty. The figure was only ahead of me, waiting. I put the car in reverse, my hands shaking. That's when my engine died. The lights shut off. The air went still, and in the suffocating silence, I heard the first knock. A slow, deliberate tap on my driver's side window. I couldn't move. The second knock came, louder this time. The fog outside thickened, pressing against the glass, obscuring everything beyond. Then, the third knock, and a whisper, "Let me in." I don't remember screaming, but I must have. My hands fumbled for the lock, the door handle, anything to keep whatever was out there from getting inside. Then, a blinding flash. Headlights. A car behind me. The moment the light flooded my interior, the knocking stopped. The fog thinned. My engine roared back to life on its own. I didn't hesitate. I slammed the gas pedal, tearing down the road, never daring to look in my mirrors. I made it home just before sunrise, shaking, barely able to think. The next day, I checked the maps again. The road didn't exist.